everyone to an audience with the President. It's nice to see you all, and if this is your first time in one of these sessions, an extra warm welcome. My name's Alf Hurst, and I'm going to be your chair for the next hour. So I'm going to hand you over now to the President of the Spiritualist National Union, Minister David Bruton. David.
Thank you, Alf. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's edition of Audience with the President. I have to admit, I'm really looking forward to this because, like many spiritualists, I have a great interest in the work of our pioneers. And I think sometimes we overlook the considerable contribution that they made in laying the foundations of our religion. Perhaps in the 21st century, we're all a little bit guilty of taking their work and their dedication for granted. When we consider what would happen in the early part of the 20th and latter part of the 19th century, spiritualism operated in a very, very different world. And I hope tonight that we're going to share an insight into a lady that was such an important part in bringing spiritualism from America, where it was born in 1848 at the Hydesville phenomena, to England, UK, in 1853. So my guest this evening we're getting very cosmopolitan, ladies and gentlemen, in the range of our guests, because I'm so happy to welcome my guest this evening, who is live from Salt Lake City in America. And I would like to welcome Sharon DeBartolo Carmack, who is a 30-year-old veteran. She really doesn't look old enough to be a 30-year-old veteran, certified genealogist with a Master's of Fine Art in Creative and Non-Fiction Writing. She's also a member of the Spiritualist National Union. She has got a certificate in speaking and demonstrating, and also the Advanced Academic Diploma from the SNU. And I don't know how she's achieved this, but it is a fantastic achievement that she's actually the author of no less than 24 books. But the one that we're interested tonight is her newest book, and that is In Search of Maria B. Hayden, the American medium who brought spiritualism to the UK. As I've already said, Sharon lives in Salt Lake City, Utah, USA, and obviously most of us know that's the birthplace of the Mormon religion and a really strong Mormon culture within that particular area of America. So Sharon, thank you so much for joining us. It's a great pleasure to have you as our guest tonight. And I'd like to begin by asking you, what brought you into spiritualism and why spiritualism?
All right, well, thank you, David, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I came to spiritualism in my 50s. I was 57 when I had known about spiritualism before from taking a religious studies course in college. And so I was aware of spiritualism, but I didn't really study it or even give it much thought as my own religion until my late 50s. And that's when I started studying it, and the 7 principles resonated with me. And I found SNU and SNUI.
Brilliant. So are there any spiritualist churches in Salt Lake City?
Absolutely none. No, there aren't any. And this isn't actually the birthplace of Mormonism. Mormonism actually began in upstate New York, where spiritualism began. Oh. But the Mormon migration ended up primarily here in Salt Lake. They're all over the country, they're all over the world as well. But this is the hub, so to speak.
Absolutely. And we actually had Janet Nahavik on a couple of weeks ago, and she talked about this hotbed of new religion that came out of New York State. And obviously spiritualism was one of the religions that came from that. So really, your experience of spiritualism has been very much through the SNU and SNUI. I know that you're very heavily involved in that. Coming to spiritualism at the age that you did, and you're a working medium, I know, did you have any experiences in your earlier life that any psychic experience, any mediumistic experience?
None at all. I was as psychic as a brick. I never saw a spirit. I never saw a ghost. As much as I tried, I never did. So it was interesting that at 57, I thought, I wonder if anyone can become a medium. And do you have to be born a medium? And I think we're all born mediums, but we all develop at different ages. And I'm certainly a late bloomer. So yeah, it was something that I chose to do at that age. Whether spirit was nudging me or not, I don't know, but I had no experiences prior to that.
Okay, that's interesting then. So your journey into mediumship has been somewhat a revelation for you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
And I know this is a daft question to ask to a medium because we've got many mediums in the meeting, but are you passionate about your mediumship? Has it changed your life? Has it changed your approach to death?
Yes, I'd say yes to all of that. It has changed my approach. Let's start with the approach to death. It has definitely changed that. I no longer fear death. I no longer am concerned about dying because I know we all live on. And what's wonderful about spiritualism is because all religions believe in an afterlife, but spiritualism is really the only religion that believes we can communicate still. And so that has totally changed my outlook as well. And I figure what I don't get done here, I'll do on the other side. So that has changed quite a bit. And the other thing that has changed is realizing that our contribution to spirit, our service to spirit, isn't just about giving messages or giving healing, but in honoring and perpetuating our pioneers, which is what I tried to do with Maria Hayden's life.
Absolutely. And I would really now like to turn to Maria, who is the focus of a 600-page book that you've just published. I think most of us that have studied SNU courses will know her name, will have some concept of the job she did in bringing spiritualism to the UK in 1853, as we said earlier. Can I ask you then, Sharon, why Maria Hayden? What attracted you to her? Why did you feel it necessary to explore this woman's life story?
Well, as I say in the book, I'm not sure whether I attracted her or she attracted me, or it was a mutual attraction. But when I saw in the SD1 course, there was just this little paragraph about this woman who supposedly made this absolutely significant contribution to spiritualism by bringing the religion to the UK. And there was just 2 or 3 sentences. I thought, this isn't right. And I'm a certified genealogist. And so the genealogist in me said, well, she's from America. I can certainly research her life here in America. I don't know what I can do with the UK. As it turned out, I was able to do more than I expected. So I began researching her life like I would any other ancestor, and learning when she was born, when she married, what her life was like, what her life was like before she went to England, what her life was like afterwards, and ended up with a 600-page book. Now, I will say, for anyone who's intimidated, and I do, it's 600 pages. It's a big, thick book. I will say there are a lot of illustrations. There are a lot of footnotes. In fact, probably a third of the book are the notes and the bibliography, but also Maria became a medical doctor in her 40s, and I've reprinted her medical articles. So there's a lot in this book, a lot.
It sounds absolutely fascinating, because I think maybe today we lose sight of the fact that in the time Maria lived, late 19th century, you know, the role of women was so very different to what it is today. And the very fact that at the age of 40, she qualified to be a doctor, that is quite an achievement on its own. So talk to me a little bit about the lady. Was she a strong lady? Was she a weak lady? What drove her? Because I just think we need to know more about this remarkable lady.
Well, absolutely, she was a strong lady. She was far ahead of her time. But we also have to remember, as you mentioned, David, the time period in which she was doing all this. This was a time period when women did not work outside the home, when their responsibility was to their husband. What's interesting about Maria's story, and I like to also think of it as a love story, because had she not had the support and backing, and I'm not talking financial support necessarily, because for a time period, Maria was the breadwinner, but had she not had the emotional and I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but the emotional support of her husband, William B. Hayden, she would not have accomplished what she did. He is the one who is the forgotten pioneer. He is the one that supported her, that defended her in the press, that defended her to people, that encouraged her, that supported her 100% in not only her mediumship, but going as becoming a healing medium and going to medical school. So behind every great woman, there is a man.
Absolutely, and that's tremendous that she got that support. And as you've said, I'm sure she wouldn't have achieved half of what she did without the support of her husband. Can you talk to me a little bit about, because my limited knowledge from my own studies within the union's courses, she created some waves when she came to the UK, didn't she? Society wasn't quite ready for this this wonderful lady and her gift of mediumship.
That's correct. There are many instances in the press where she was attacked, and of course people were testing her. Back then they didn't call themselves evidential mediums, they called themselves test mediums, because they expected their sitters to test them. And she did get tested. However, there were a number of people who weren't interested in testing her, but were interested in challenging her and trying to trick her. And those were the people who wrote the negative reviews of her in the press. But for every negative review, there was a positive one where people were open-minded and actually tested her as we would today. We would expect today in the interest of fairness and science. But the other thing that I wanted to point out about her is that she was quite open to this. She got a lot of criticism, absolutely, but it didn't shake her to the point where she quit. You know, I think if I were doing it and I got all that negative press, I'd hang it up and say, hey, sorry, spirit world, this isn't for me. But she stuck with it. And the other thing that's so important about her contribution is there were two other mediums who came to the UK or hung up their shingle. One said they were also from the United States, but we think she was from Ireland, and there was somebody else from England who hung up their shingle a little after Maria was there. Those two mediums did not attract the positive kind of attention Maria got. Maria was giving seances for the upper classes and the upper middle class, to dukes and duchesses and ladies and lords and people of notoriety, journalists and medical doctors. So she was gaining a reputation unlike any other medium who was trying to operate during that day.
That's absolutely brilliant. Also, I'm interested to note, she was in her own right a fine physical medium, wasn't she?
Yes, yes, that early mediumship was physical mediumship. And what we mean by that is she, or the spirit world through her, produced raps. And that was a big controversy back then. Who was making the raps? You know, she's banging her shoe against the table leg, or she has an accomplice who's making the raps. Well, as you'll read in my book, I can debunk all of those ideas. That's not how it happened. The only explanation is the spirit world was making the raps. And this was how she communicated. The method of communication she brought with her from America was it was like a Ouija board. It was a piece of cardboard with the letters of the alphabet and the numbers 1 through 9 and 0. So what would happen is she would ask the spirit world to communicate, and the recipient, the sitter, would point to the letter, and no rap meant that's not the right letter. A rap meant that is the right letter. And so you write down, okay, we've got an A, and then we go through the alphabet. Oh, we've got an R. Okay, we'll write down the R, so that words form sentences. Most of her seances lasted for 2 hours because it took so long to go through the alphabet and to get those messages. So that was part of the physical phenomena. She also did table moving with absolutely nobody near the table. She also, in her seances at Knebworth House in England for Sir Edward Bulwer Lytton, she would cause the wine well, spirit would do it, but she would be the medium for it, causing the wine in decanters to move, but the decanters and the table weren't moving. So she had a lot of interesting physical phenomena that we don't see today.
Yes. And of course, all this was done in daylight. No darkened rooms, no cabinets, nothing like that.
Nothing like that. No, Maria was adamant that she not be considered a fraud. And so, yeah, there were some seances that were held in the evening, but it was, you know, candlelight that time or gaslight. But many of her seances took place during the day, and she was visible. She was visible to everyone.
Absolutely. So a fine medium in her own right. So
yes.
After 12 months in England, working with all the nobility and everything, what happened when she went back to America?
She gave birth. One of the reasons, you know, people think it was all the negative criticism drove her back. No, she was pregnant and she gave birth not long after she got back to America. And then she continued to practice her mediumship in Boston. She did return to England in 1855. However, by the time she got there, she was old news. We had Daniel Douglas Home, who was capturing all the attention, and she couldn't even get ads placed in the newspaper to say that she had returned. So she was only back in England for about a month, and then she came back to Boston.
That's absolutely fascinating, amazing. You also say that she used her clairvoyance as part of her healing, and also her medical, she used her medical clairvoyance in effect to diagnose.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part. What was your,
She actually used her clairvoyance, her spiritual gifts, to diagnose through her. Yes, okay.
Yes, she did. And in fact, those abilities were actually evident as a child. She talks about in one article where she supplied information, talks about as a child, she had this gift for medical intuition, medical healing mediumship. And so after she got back to America, while she was in Boston, she was still pretty much doing just traditional spirit mediumship. But then when she took her mediumship to New York City, she started offering healing mediumship. She called it at the time clair-o-sympathy. Now we know clair means, you know, like clairvoyance, seeing with the mind's eye, or hearing, clairaudience, hearing with the mind's ear. she coined that term clarosympathy, meaning her mind, her abilities were in sympathy with the patient's body. What she was doing essentially was psychometry, and she became known as an excellent diagnostician and used psychometry just by holding the patient's hand. She could diagnose what was wrong with the body, where the problem was, and then receive from the spirit world the treatment.
So really, for a qualified doctor to be using these methods at such a time, that would have been amazing.
Yes.
I wonder how the medical fraternity responded to her.
Well, and that's what's interesting. She became what's known as an eclectic physician, which means eclecticism is kind of like a naturopath or an alternative medicine physician today. They believed in herbal remedies, not chemical remedies. They believed in treating mind, body, and spirit. And so in the medical journals at the time, you actually find articles about spiritualism and crossing over into medicine. And so, you know, it wasn't a big deal then, except they were trying to shut down the charlatans, of course. Maria was on many committees to shut down charlatan clairvoyant physicians and to get them to get a license or to go to medical school. So yeah, she was known and respected by her male colleagues, because there weren't that many women, by her male colleagues as an excellent psychometrist and diagnostician.
And just absolutely years ahead of her time.
Way ahead.
Way ahead, because looking at what we work with today and trying to get healing into our health service, it's been an ongoing battle now for some time, and we are having a measure of success and acceptance, but that door is still closed in many respects. So the fact that she was doing this pioneering work in the latter part of the 19th century, that is fantastic and brilliant. And it's interesting to note, Sharon, before you actually started this research project to uncover the life of the lady, of this remarkable lady, we didn't even have an image of her, a photograph of her.
Nope. And I spent a long time hunting for one, contacting libraries and archives and people in spiritualism. I mean, I was searching everywhere. I finally decided the only way I'm going to find a photograph of this lady is to trace down all of her descendants, contact them, and hope that someone had a photograph. And thankfully, someone did. And so the photograph that's in the book, that's in SNU today, is the only known identified photograph of Maria in existence.
That is brilliant. It must have been such a high point for you when you finally achieved that. What kind of response did you get from the family? Did they know anything of her life's work?
Well, here's what's so interesting about that. Of the family I contacted, all of them said, oh, you need to contact this person because this person is the family archivist. And so I had been in touch with that person, and it turns out that person is LDS Mormon. Done research, not to the extent that I had done it, but had done some research on the family, because the Mormons are known for being very pro genealogy and tracing their ancestors. And so her great, if I've got it right without looking it up, her great grandson or great grandson, I think it lives here in Salt Lake City. So, and it was his wife who had all the family papers and the photographs. So talk about spirit work in an amazing way.
That is brilliant. Yes, I actually attended a Mormon event in London a couple of years ago, and they are actually behind Ancestry UK, which is a service here to for people to explore their family history. Mm-hmm. And they are very dedicated to actually helping people to explore this. So it's interesting. And actually we were invited to that particular event as spiritualists. So we were accepted through our links with the IFN. and it was a fascinating evening. We actually, Donny Osmond was one of the guest speakers there. So it was an interesting evening, an interesting opportunity to meet somebody from my teenage years. Just shows how old, but never mind.
Yes. Well, and what's interesting here in Utah, spiritualism and Mormonism almost merged in the late 19th century.
Okay.
Yes. Yes, because they have similar beliefs about the spirit world, the afterlife. And so, yeah, the two religions almost merged. But the problem was the elders of the LDS church didn't necessarily like the fact that their congregation, anyone could communicate with the spirit world. They wanted to be the ones who communicated. And so they didn't quite see eye to eye on that.
That's a familiar story down many religions.
Yeah.
Spiritualism has almost, I mean, because obviously in the early part of the 20th century, we were almost reversed into the Church of England. And that didn't happen either, because obviously the hierarchy within the priesthood, and they just didn't want ordinary everyday people communicating where they perhaps couldn't do. So it's fascinating that there are parallels there between the different religions, but also an understanding and an acceptance which is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. So clearly you needed to live in Salt Lake City, didn't you, really? As it's got to be the heart of one of your major interests.
Yes. Yes. Well, and what's interesting, BYU, Brigham Young University, which is an LDS university, has the largest spiritualism collection in their library in the state. I went to their, in Provo, Utah, went to the university library to do a lot of research on spiritualism there.
That's amazing. I think I'm right in saying the Psychic News Archive is also archived digitally in Utah as well, I believe.
Oh, I don't know that.
I'm wrong about that, but yeah, I think that happened a couple of years ago. It's somewhere in the area anyway. So, and that in itself is a fantastic archive of UK spiritualism, and obviously further afield. So before we open the floor to our audience tonight to be able to ask their own questions, I suppose you've been asked this question many times before. How far have you traced your own family back? Have you had time with writing 24 books?
Yes, I have. I have traced my own ancestry. On my father's side, I can only go back to about the early 1700s. My father's side comes from the southern part of Italy. On my mother's side, her Irish side, I can only go back to about the mid 1800s. And in fact, my next book that will be coming out this summer is a revision that I'm doing on my own Irish family history and writing about them. Now, I wrote that book 20 years ago, and a lot has become available. I've made several trips to Ireland. And then on my mother's father's side, I can go back to Jamestown, 1607 in America. Wow. And beyond into England as well.
So the links are there.
Yes.
Yeah, one piece of information that I came away from that Mormon event from was the fact that actually how closely we are all interlinked.
Yes.
So, just because you were born the other side of the world, there are actually strong links and ties there, and that must be a fascinating subject to explore and research. So at this point, I'm going to hand over to Alv to allow our audience to ask any questions that they would like, and I'll come back to you a little bit later, Sharon. Thank you.
Okay, David, thank you. Please make sure the questions are easy.
Okay. I'll do my best. Thank you, Sharon. It is tremendously exciting, and I know when I first got the email about this book from Sharon and realized that there was a picture of Maria to be had, I think my response in the email back to Sharon began with the letters OMG. It was so exciting. If you have questions, please raise your hand, as I said earlier, or type it into the chat box. I've got one already from Joanne for Sharon. And Joanne asked you, Sharon, while you were writing the book, did you use your own mediumistic ability to try and contact Maria in any way? And I guess by extension, I wonder if you felt her presence. You've already said you're not quite sure whether you chose Maria or Maria chose you. So it's quite an interesting area for an author working with such a significant pioneer.
Yes, I do believe I did. I wasn't necessarily conscious of doing it. I wasn't like I do when I connect with spirit, when I'm doing demonstrations. I wasn't deliberately saying, okay, Maria, or opening my awareness. But I do feel she was guiding me to sources that I don't think I would have normally uncovered or found had it not been for her guidance. I do believe she influenced how I would write this book, because as a biographer, it's a huge responsibility to tell someone's story, especially someone whose story has not been told before. And so I would constantly ask her, is this the direction you want to go? And I do feel like she guided me just through my intuition. I knew. A lot of people kept saying to me, when is the book going to be done? When is it going to be done? And I kept saying, when Maria tells me it's done. And I finally just got to the point where I knew it was done. Now, on the other side of that, I did have some mediums. Before I got a photograph, before I found the photograph of Maria, I had a couple of mediums, spirit artists, connect with Maria and draw her likeness. And those two are in the book. Melanie Alberts, who is an SNUI member from Austin, Texas, and Anne-Marie Bond, who is an SNU member and teacher, both connected with Maria and drew her likeness. And when I finally found the photograph and put them side by side, which I do in the book, you can see the likeness for that. And they also brought through a lot about Maria, who she was and what her life was like. And a lot of that information was before I had really begun researching her. And so it became very accurate.
Let's go into the room and ask Helena to unmute her microphone and there you are. Go ahead.
Hi, Helena.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I was trying to get on the PC, but it's not working today, so I'm on my phone. I've got a general question. Obviously, with the story with Maria, I completely agree. She was a testing medium. And for me, for the proof of that is, I was wondering in regards to the method with the raps, because obviously there is a query in regards to, with the Fox sisters, if you think, some papers state it was 1 for yes, 2 for no, 2 for yes, 1 for no. And obviously this brings my question into regards to the imposter of her story, that she was actually tested. Now, I actually think that is actually very true in the sense that I wonder if you know the method that was used. Was it 1 for yes or 2 for no? Which would be an interesting path to look at, because I think personally that she was being tested because the spirit world already knew. Hence why when she asked them afterwards, if you are here, prove yourself, which obviously all the knocking of adults, children ascended. So to me, that actually proves that the spirit world does know what's happening. And she definitely is the medium that I would consider is what Silverbird said, try the spirits, even John test the spirits. She was the lady for it. That's all I wanted to say. If you knew the method, as I say, there is a lot of discrepancy in regards to the raps. Was it 1 for yes or 2 for no, or vice versa?
Okay, you might have missed the part where I talked about that. She had a piece of cardboard with the letters of the alphabet and the numbers, just like a Ouija board. And the recipient would point to the letters and if that letter did not get any sound, they went to the next letter. If B got a rap, they wrote down a B. If you went past to the next letter, and so it was, other mediums were working with the yes-no method, which is fine, but you can't really get messages that way. This way, you got words and sentences and whole messages, just like we would today. It was laborious, but she did it.
Agree. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Helena. And it is fascinating to think about how different spirit communication was all that time ago, and looking back through history, how things have developed. So we have another question, and it relates to, I guess, Maria as a woman, not only in spiritualism, but in society as well. And it's wondered, Sharon, is it possible to say anything about how much impact she had? And I guess really it's difficult to judge these days, isn't it? But I guess the work that she did was absolutely radical and perhaps transgressive even at the time.
It was, and that's the other thing that's so remarkable. SNU and UK Spiritualism at least gave her 2 or 3 sentences. When I researched her in the American spiritualist literature, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, other than what Emma Hardinge Britten wrote about her in her books. There was nothing in the history of the American spiritualism, other than she went to the UK. All these contributions she made were just totally ignored. And here's why I think that was. Someone like Emma Hardinge Britten and some of the other mediums were public mediums doing trance work and giving lectures. They were visible to the whole public. Maria was your everyday medium doing private sittings, what they would call seances then, or group readings or gallery readings, if you want to go that far. But she gave readings to only the number of people who could sit around her seance table. So she wasn't necessarily in the public eye like some of these other mediums. But in the book and in my research, I was able to document over 30 of her seances and what people wrote about them. So that's the other reason the book's kind of long, because I talk about each one of these seances, how it was received, what the people who wrote about those seances had to say, both negative and positive, but by and large, positive.
Thank you, Sharon. And we have a comment in the chat box from Kevin. Mm-hmm. And Kevin talks about, well, he says he's got your book already. And when he did one of his courses for the SNU education courses, he chose to write about Maria for one of his questions. And so he has a question about Maria and about when she was being tested with the board, or the cardboard with letters on that you talked about. And he wants to know, is it true that she was facing away from the board when the raps occurred? Do you know anything about that?
Oh, absolutely. I know about that. I know everything about her. Yes, a lot of time, because that was the criticism. That was one of the criticisms. Oh, she's reading the sitters, the look on their face as they point to the letters, and that's how she knows, you know, what words to spell. A lot of times she had her back to the board, or the board was not visible to her. There were times when she was reading a book or the newspaper while this was going on. So yeah, absolutely. They would test her and make sure she couldn't see the board half the time. So yeah, they were definitely testing her. One of the things I would also like to add is in 1855, a scientist in America named Robert Hare created what was called the spiritoscope. And you can see an illustration of that in the book. But it was a dial. I don't know if in the UK you get the television show Wheel of Fortune, where there's a big dial and letters and
yeah, we would understand that, yes.
Okay, so this was a big dial that, you know, had a thing, I don't know what it's called, that points to the letters. Well, Maria sat with her hands on the table and this dial was not visible to her. And Hare would ask questions of the spirit world and the dial would go around like with the Ouija board, the letters, but it would go around so fast, they really had to have a good scribe to write down what it was saying. But Maria couldn't say it. And what's so important about those experiments is it had nothing to do with sound, nothing to do with raps. It only had to do with the physical phenomena of that wheel spinning around to get to the letters. And that was not visible to her. And those experiments were critical. And those experiments you rarely hear about. I wrote about Robert here in the SNUI newsletter. So that was several months ago. But his experiments were proved, in my opinion, proved spiritualism, proved life after death.
Fantastic. We have another question that's come through from Edgar in the chat box. And Edgar tells us that he currently knows a little about spiritualism. I think Edgar will know a lot more about spiritualism by the time we've done today. But he wondered, is there a connection between Maria and Mary Todd Lincoln? Sharon.
There is no, hi Edgar, there is no direct connection, but Mary Todd Lincoln would hold seances in the White House after her son Willie had passed away. And so there were many seances held in the White House. In fact, there are some that say Lincoln still roams the halls of the White House, that people have seen him. But Maria and Mary Todd Lincoln did not cross paths.
Okay, now we know. And Sophie says, hi Sharon, and is finding it fascinating so far. And Sophie would like to know, did Maria have any known connections or involvement with any other mediums in England? And did she have any relatives here? And I guess to add to that, something that's been a question in my mind is, I wonder what the impulse was that made Maria want to come to the UK. I'm terribly glad she did, but I do wonder why.
Okay, let me address that first. William, her husband William, was friends with a man named George Stone, who was involved in lecturing in the UK on what was popular then known as electrobiology. And when William wrote to Stone and told him about the phenomena Maria was experiencing, when Stone came back to the US, he wanted to see it for himself. And he put Maria through tests as well. And then said, you need to come to the UK. I really think they would be interested. Maria and William were on the fence about it. They weren't quite sure that this is what they should be doing. So they consulted with their spirit friends and said, is this the right time? Should we do this? And they got a very positive response. And so that George Stone was their host and brought that. He's an American, but he had been lecturing in the UK. So he is the one that encouraged them to come to the UK and show this phenomena. As far as her involvement with other mediums, there weren't any. There just weren't any, except for those two that I talked about earlier that were basically charlatans. There weren't any other mediums in the UK at the time. And once she left England, and even when she went back in 1855, she really didn't have any interaction with any other UK mediums. She did with American mediums, but not with UK mediums. As for her relatives, her ancestry goes back to Yorkshire. Her grandfather was the immigrant to Canada and brought with him his son, which is Maria's father. And so she has Yorkshire, England roots.
Oh, how exciting. She's got Yorkshire connections. I'm very, very, very happy. Thank you, Sharon. I got a question from Lisa, who's given me the question via the chat box. And she says, hi, Sharon. And it's a question about you. We're moving away from Maria for a second. So you arrived at Spiritualism at the age of 57. She's been listening, hasn't she, very carefully. Did this happen via a particular life event, or was it natural, a spontaneous happening?
Okay, who's asking this question, Lisa?
Lisa, yes.
Oh, Lisa, this is the embarrassing question. Okay, and those are the only kind worth asking, right? All right, so here's the real story. All right, it is embarrassing to kind of say this because it sounds awful, but anyway, I was bored. I was flipping through TV channels, and up came the TV show The Long Island Medium. And that's when I thought, hey, can I do this? Can anyone be a medium? So I started reading books and eventually found SNU and SNU. And so that's how it started. Isn't that terrible?
So
No it's no great spiritual revelation. Great
so
life.
you decided not to go for the Teresa Caputo hairstyle then.
Right.
Fantastic. Can I invite Lisa to unmute your microphone and to ask your question, please?
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Hi, Sharon. Can I just ask, did you already have a belief in God?
I would say I was more agnostic.
Okay.
I would say my belief in the spirit world came first.
Yeah.
And then a belief in God. And for me, God is not a man sitting on a throne, but an energy of love. And so I was raised Catholic. And so I had to get rid of that and realize that God had a totally different meaning. And and then it kind of fell into place for me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question.
Thank you. Thank you for asking that question, Lisa. It's useful to know a little bit more about people, isn't it? And their spirituality. Sharon, a question now about pioneers. And the question really talks about how as spiritualists we seem to think a lot about our pioneers and their contribution, but I guess it's about our sense of history. What place do you feel that history plays in our lives as spiritualists today and also in the future? And I guess that's an interesting question to ask a genealogist.
Yes. Well, of course, I feel strongly about history because if we don't know where we're from, how do we know where we're going? And as we've seen, when we study the pioneers, when we study their methods of mediumship, and then we look at our methods of mediumship today, naturally it's going to evolve and change. But why was it that Maria and many of the pioneer mediums could get names and dates and places and we can't today, or few of us can get that today? So what was so different? And the mediums of the past, if you read the early pioneers, Fox Sisters, Maria, or any of those early pioneers in the 19th century, they didn't sit in the power. They didn't go, some of them went to development classes. Those who wanted to become mediums might have gone to development classes, but it just happened for them. Like for Maria, initially, when Maria and William started holding seances, the spirit world chose William to be the public medium. But he was busy with his career as a journalist and as a botanic physician. And he said, no, he didn't want to be in the limelight. So the spirit world says, okay, well, we'll pick the next best thing. We'll pick Maria. And so they chose Maria to be the medium. And as I said before, without William's support in that day and age, that could have never happened. It could have never happened. He had to have the confidence and the ability, the less of an ego to allow her to be in the limelight and to shine. And I think in studying history, it's not just about the pioneers and their methods of mediumship, but their lifestyles and what their lives were like. That's what I find missing from a lot of the literature about spiritualist pioneers, which I hope I did a good job with Maria, is putting her life into historical context. So you understand not just the woman, but the day and age in which she lived.
Fantastic, great answer there. Thank you for answering that, Sharon. Another question now for you, Sharon, from Sharon, the two Sharons.
Okay.
And Sharon asks, did Maria's children inherit any of her gifts? And I do wonder what impact that had on her family as well, that she was such a significant figure in her field.
And that's a good question. I'm going to take the reverse of that first. I have not been able to document any of her parents or ancestors who had the gift. I wasn't able to, because I went looking for that, in particular on the mother's side. I felt really drawn to her mother's side to look for that. And I didn't find anything that would suggest that someone else, her siblings, someone else in the family might have had abilities. As for her children, she had only 2 surviving daughters. And there is also nothing that indicates her children, grandchildren on down, if they had abilities, they didn't leave a record of it. And so unfortunately, we don't have a record of her impact on her children or grandchildren. And that was the other interesting thing about telling Maria's story. She left no letters, no diaries, no documents by her own hand, except for her medical articles. So most of what we know about Maria comes from her husband, William, who we know is going to be a little prejudiced toward her or for her. And because he wrote a memoir, it primarily deals with their time in England, but it also deals a little bit with their time before England, which is how we know that William was initially chosen as the medium. So her story had to be reconstructed from what others wrote about her. And likewise with her descendants, I could find nothing written by them that talked about her or talked about that they might have had abilities. So if they did, they didn't talk about it.
Wow, fantastic. I think our last question is going to be a question from me, because we have talked about the importance of new books coming into spiritualism. And how do you feel about that, Sharon? How important it is that we create new bodies of work? Because there are often some of the key texts from our history that we all refer to, but it feels like we do need to keep building that repository of work there. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel 2 ways about that. If Maria had written her story, I wouldn't have needed to write it. So as a writer, I'm glad she didn't. But if she had written her story, we would have had a firsthand account. So for us today, even if you can't get it published, even if you have to self-publish it, and of course, Karen McCarthy told her story brilliantly, and White Crow Press was her publisher. Even if you can't get a publisher, you should write your story. That's a task that I'll be doing at some point, telling my story as well, because it is important for the future. How are they going to know about us? Do you think there's going to be another Sharon Carmack in the future that's going to research and write a 600-page book about you? It's doubtful. It's better if you do it. You're the firsthand knowledge person with that information. So it's much better if you write the story and leave that for posterity. Much, much better. I do want to say as well that for those who do feel a little bit intimidated about reading a 600-page book, I do a free reading and discussion group once a month where we talk about certain chapters of the book and talk about the history and the philosophy and things that were going on in Maria's life. So if you're interested in joining that discussion group, it's free. It's not on SNUI. It's on my Zoom account. Feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to provide you with the Zoom link.
That's fantastic. And I think it's really important that we as a community encourage each other to write and to record things and to get that down for future generations of spiritualism. And indeed, Isabel in the chat box describes you as a pioneer yourself, Sharon, and I think that's the case, because you've really added to a really important body of work around our pioneers. So just before I hand back to David, just to let you all know that, a plug here, SNU Today is now out, and inside you'll find an in-depth article where we talk to Sharon, who will explain more of what we've talked about this evening. So thank you, Sharon. I'm going to hand over to David now.
Thank you. And I put my email address in the chat box if anyone would like to contact me.
Thank you, Sharon. And I think I'm going to announce, because we've only literally discussed this at the weekend at the NEC meeting. We've actually agreed that we are going forward, actually deposit SNU Today with the British Library and other major libraries in the UK as a periodical, a magazine. But I think because of the quality of the work that goes into SNU Today, it's playing our part in documenting the here and now, and that is so important. I spend my life visiting churches and meeting some amazing people. We've got some fantastic people in the spiritualist movement, and sadly their work is lost and forgotten within a few years, and that is so sad. So in one small way, the SNU is certainly capturing. So you see, Sharon, you are there for posterity in the British Library. That's fantastic.
That's an excellent idea.
It's a brilliant session tonight. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and I'd like, on all of our behalf, to thank Sharon so much for joining us from Salt Lake City. And thank you. It's been a fascinating evening and we've really enjoyed it. My thanks as always go to Alv, our chairman, for the technology. And I'd like to just mention that next week our subject is something that's very close to our hearts, and that is digital spiritualism. I'm looking forward to welcoming Minister Simon Key, who is chairman of SNUI, and Daniel Phoenix, who is also one of the committee. And we'll be talking about this journey we've all been on in the last 12 months of having to see our churches closed and our physical meetings come to a halt, and explore the world, the virtual world, and create the virtual spiritualism. So I hope you'll all join me for that. I'm sure it'll be an equally fascinating evening. And thank you on behalf of Audience with the President. Good night, God bless, take care, keep safe, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Thank you. Good night,
everyone.
Thank you. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye.